I think especially in the early days, you don't know who the right customer is. So the goal is bring 50 customer aughts on, figure out which 15 stay, research the hell out of those 15 to figure out what makes them who they are and why they renewed. And then hopefully the next 20 customers you bring on, more than 15 out of 50 will stay. If you have 50 of these calls over a few months and you bounce pricing off of 50 people, you're going to pretty soon start to understand what pricing people will go for, what they won't go for, at what point you're going to lose customers, as well as, that's a market we definitely shouldn't go after. That is what you are focused on as a founder in your first couple years finding product market fit, is you're having 50 conversations a month and you're triangulating between all these conversations to figure out what the product is, what the pricing is, what the packaging is, how to talk about it. I think what's really important is in the early stages, you're doing just as much exploration and learning as you are selling, because the reality is, A, you don't quite know who the customer is.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit. Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the Product Market Fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you.
Noah, welcome to the show, man.
Great to be here.
Dude, so I found you I'm finding like quite a few founders these days just through LinkedIn. And I saw your post where you launched a product 2 years ago. And now that product is doing like 300K MRR. So call that whatever, $3.5-4 million a year. You know, hit $1 million ARR the first year, tripled the year after, which frankly, like, who doesn't want that? Like, that's the dream. That's what everybody wants. But what really struck me wasn't just that you did that. It was how thought through every step was of how to launch a product and make it successful and get traction. So I thought, you know what, like, why don't we just expand on this post, because you can only go so far on LinkedIn, and just dive into every single step and your thinking and the details and just how you made it happen. And, you know, hopefully founders can just like steal from that playbook as much as possible.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Perfect. So listen, so I mean, like, just really quickly, what was the product? Like, maybe a little bit of origin story and just like what the product is, just for context mainly. And then we can just start to, okay, what's step one?
Even though we founded Stacker in 2017, the product we're talking about was kind of formally launched in the back half of 2022. It is a product that helps brands investing in editorial content, whether that be thought leadership, whether that be data journalism from their own data, brands that are investing in their own content. It's a product and a platform that helps them distribute that content to third-party news outlets. So just so you can get a kind of a feel for the type of client, we're focused on enterprise brands, but the ACV is in the 60 to 90K a year range. We're signing annual agreements for, somewhere between 60 and 90 grand a year. So kind of SMB up to enterprise. Trying to get in touch with probably like the VP level or director level at enterprise brands.
And so the idea is an enterprise brand, like what's his example client and what are they trying to get done with your product? What's the value?
Maybe Instacart Instacart has hired a editorial and journalism team that is putting out content like, most popular groceries in your state last week, or, looking at during the Super Bowl, what were the most commonly ordered items, et cetera. They're putting that content out there because they just, for brand exposure, the more you see Instacart and think of Instacart, the better. Not a lot of people go to Instacart's blog. And so what we do is we take that story comparing all 50 states by their most popular groceries, and we have relationships with thousands of news outlets across the country. And we will get that story organically placed across hundreds of news outlets, whether that be the Miami Herald, the Chicago Tribune, San Francisco Chronicle, or Yahoo, AOL, MSN. We have a platform that will help them syndicate that story in full and get that placed across hundreds of news outlets.
Okay, makes sense. And you have a kind of company happening already. We can get into the origin story of like how this happened and whatever later. But what is, when you have this idea of helping, let's say, the Instacarts of the world just get their content distributed organically in as many places as possible, what is step one in that playbook to generate some revenue, to get some customers, and to see if this really works out?
So It's a good question because when we launched this product, I had a lot of background and relationships in media and publishing, but I had never sold a deal in my life in advertising and to a brand. And so, candidly, looking back on the past 3 years, I think it's been really exciting just to think about what you can do in 3 years, even if you have zero connections starting on day one. And that really speaks to what does it mean? How am I thinking about getting customers on day one? Is just getting out there and leveraging your existing network. So, I, on one hand, am starting to think about, okay, I may not know who the perfect customer is, but let's just start to create a list of who are the 100 potential customers. If I could get on the phone and pitch to 100 companies, who would those be? And I think it's important at that stage that you're not reaching for the stars. You're probably not putting any Fortune 500 brands on there, because it's important to remember that you only get one shot with these guys. And at first, you're probably working with more of an MVP. You're probably working with my product is this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to be in a year. But you're getting together a list of 100 companies you would want to work with. And then you're also getting together a list of just anyone that has ties into that industry. And what I'm then doing is just getting on the phone with as many people as I possibly can. So on that first list of 100 companies that I might want to work with, I'm literally just going to their LinkedIn, looking at all of their employees and looking at, okay, at this company, here's the 7 people I might want to talk to. And then looking at what mutual connections I have and seeing if I can get a warm intro. So I'm literally going company by company. Okay, here's the company, open up their LinkedIn page, search by titles to figure out who's the VP of content that I would want to speak with, who's the director of X that I would want to speak with. I'm pulling up all those tabs and then seeing what mutual connections I have and then asking for warm introductions. And then at times I'm also just reaching out to some people and saying, would you mind getting on the phone? I think what's really important is, especially at this stage when you're super early on, you're not asking to get on the phone to pitch them as much as you're asking to get on the phone almost to just learn. I think what's really important is in the early stages, you're doing just as much exploration and learning as you are selling, because the reality is, A, you don't quite know who the customer is, and it's much better to get on the phone kind of just to meet someone than it is to get on the phone and try and pitch to them and realize, oh, wait, you're not the right customer. And the second piece is, I think at this point, it's really important just to acknowledge to yourself that the product as it stands today, the pricing, the packaging, the product marketing as you have today is probably not as good as it can be a year from now. And so you're using a lot of these conversations to inform a lot of those things.
And then just for clarity, like you already have, because you have this company, you've already built the distribution part, you already kind of have on lock.
Yeah, exactly. So at this point, when we launched this in 2022, we had the distribution half of the marketplace on lock. And we were really figuring out how to go get the supply side.
So let's get into those messages, because so the warm intro piece, it takes work to find the warm intros, but in a way, it's the obvious and easy side of the equation. Obviously, if somebody well knows somebody else well, like, they'll just use that kind of trust capital, that relationship capital, and get you a call. That's easy-ish. How are you crafting, tell me a bit more about the cold outreach. What are you saying in those messages? What kind of conversions were you actually getting? And just all those kind of finer details there. The difference between trying on cold and just getting nothing and actually, getting some real juice from it.
So the first piece I'll say just on the intro side, because again, I think there's a lot of nuance between, hey, can you introduce me to this person? And let's say the optimal way to ask for an intro is when you're asking for an intro to someone through a warm introduction, that you are not, I think it's being very clear that you're not asking to get on the phone to pitch them. It's that you're asking to get on the phone to bounce some ideas off of them. And so, a sample message in the, hey, can I get an intro to this person is, hey, I noticed you're connected with them. We've been working on this product. This person looks like an expert in this space. As I'm thinking about product strategy for next year, it'd be really interesting to connect with them. Would you be comfortable making an intro? And for one, just no one wants to make an intro and be like, hey, can I introduce you to this guy so they can pitch you on their product? That just feels icky, and you're going to get a much lower response rate of someone saying, yes, I'm willing to introduce you. Whereas if you're saying, I really value this person's expertise, everyone wants to feel like an expert, and it's much easier for that person to try and facilitate that call if you're looking to pick that person's brain than if you're saying, I'd like to sell my product to them. Can I get an introduction? But to your question of you're doing cold outreach. So before we dig into the actual message, what I will say is one of the things that has, I think, really transformed in go-to-market strategies over the past couple of years is the proliferation of LinkedIn. And I think that there are a lot of layers in terms of why and how you can use LinkedIn as a founder or as a sales executive with your team to get in touch with the right people and set up calls. The reason for that is if we think about kind of traditionally, most sales teams were using email, and to just compare email and LinkedIn in its most basic form, if you're sending a cold email, you are literally just an unknown name, face, and company. And you are, anyone now gets hundreds of spam emails every week. It's really hard to stick out, even if you are Shakespeare with a pen and know how to write a really catchy email. It's really hard to stick out. And so if you're a founder, I think what's really interesting about LinkedIn is even before you do any additional work, when you connect with someone on LinkedIn, they see your name, they see your face, they see that you have CEO in your title or founder in your title or whatever it is, and already you have a leg up on 90% of the other SDRs that are doing outreach on LinkedIn, right? So every founder is probably getting 100 spam, in mails every week as well. And just think about how just because someone has founder in their title doesn't mean you're automatically opening it, but it does at least separate you a little bit from everyone else because someone can see you, and there's some authority principle backed in there, etc. I think what's really interesting about LinkedIn, taking it one step further, is that LinkedIn is a place where you can actually kind of free advertise or warm up your prospects before you actually reach out, right? And that's in the form of posting. So I think what's been really interesting that's really blown up over the past couple of years is as a founder, you can actually connect with someone, have them accept, but before you actually message them, you're posting your thoughts on LinkedIn, you're kind of establishing yourself as an authority, putting stuff out that just puts your opinions and thoughts out there so that when that prospect that accepted your connection request, they go on LinkedIn, they're reading their morning posts.
Yes. Okay. So tell me about the content itself. Like at that point, here's what I see a lot of people doing, and I don't really see that it works. So I'm curious how you were kind of handling it. A lot of founders, they're kind of building, like the content is too specific. Like they're just talking basically about like their like in your case, you'd be talking about like, Instacart blogging about whatever, or like media publishers not getting enough distribution. Like, is that the sort of stuff and at least what I see is like when people talk about things that are so hyper focused, they just get like no reach, no visibility. And, potentially the people that even like follow you or connect with you, barely see it. What kind of posts are you doing to actually make sure you get reach, you get visibility, and you build that credibility and authority? Because otherwise, like, it all kind of falls apart.
I think the first step is thinking about who your audience is. And so what I like to do is literally pick a person. Who is the person that I would like for this to get in touch with or in front of? Literally pull up their LinkedIn profile, right? And write down 5 or 10 bullets about them. Who is this person? Where did they come from? So, we can do this exercise for me. I want the VP of content at this Fortune 500 enterprise, or like what's their background? They spent 10 years in journalism before moving over to work in the marketing department of a Fortune 500 brand. They've been in seat for maybe a year or two. What problems are they thinking about every day? Well, they're thinking about how do I justify my budget? They're thinking about how do I make sure that the work I'm doing gets noticed by the C-suite at my company so that I can rationalize my team's budget. They're thinking about kind of this existential, I used to work in journalism, now I'm working in marketing, and how do I kind of reconcile all of that? Whatever it is, you need to really understand your customer and who you're trying to get in touch with and think about what do they want to read about? And then you need to be posting about that, because at the end of the day, you're not posting for yourself and how great you are and how great your product is. You're trying to show that you have unique and interesting thoughts that will make that core customer respect you, look at you as an authority, say, this guy's interesting and has interesting things to say. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is make it so at the most basic form, when you do end up sending that message in LinkedIn to that individual, that for the past few weeks, they've been logging on and in their feed, seeing thoughts from you and saying, huh, that's kind of an interesting take. And it's okay if they 100% agree with it. Hopefully they don't think you're an asshole, but you're putting stuff out there that just makes it look like you're a player, you're a thought leader in the space, so that when you do reach out, again, on that totem pole of likelihood of getting a response, very bottom is a cold email. On top of that, you have LinkedIn message. You've never heard of me, but like, at least you can see that I'm the CEO of this company. And then on top of that is like, wow, I've been seeing this guy's content show up for the past few weeks and now they want to talk to me.
And so to be clear, like in your case, you were posting about like journalism, like you were posting about problems that are happening in that industry mainly?
Yeah. So I'm doing, I'd say, a mixture of a few different types of posts, one of which is my take on that industry. So my take on the phenomena that seasoned journalists are now leading content at large brands and speaking to that experience, speaking to that trend. I'm also putting out content, for us specifically, we have a lot of data on here's the types of content that are doing well. Here's, if you're looking for more audience for your content, we can see what types of stories drive audience, what don't. So putting stuff out like that, lots of brands have access to this data, right? I know you recently had Peter from Carta on. Carta puts out a ton of really interesting content on here's what's going on in startups so that when now founders have heard of Carta, right? So I think there is an opportunity for founders to leverage their own data or their own expertise and put out content that is both really valuable for their target customer, but also is kind of second stance an ad for their company. I've also found that job roundups are a secret sauce. So I'll do like every other week a roundup of here's 10 jobs in brand publishing. And those do very well. They buy you a lot of goodwill with the community. So there's a lot of different things you can do.
How often are you posting and are you measuring like reach and stuff like that? Or is that all kind of secondary? Like as long as you feel like the content is high quality, you don't really care.
I'm not posting once a day. Candidly, when I started doing this a little over a year ago, the concept of posting once a day on LinkedIn felt gross. It felt very cringeworthy. And, as a bootstrapped founder, we just were not getting much press. And I had been spending a lot of time trying to get press. And I just had this realization one day that if you get an article in your dream trade publication, it exists for a week and then it's kind of ephemeral and dies. But that LinkedIn,
and you'd be surprised, like the viewership, like might not be like the amount of eyeballs, probably not that big, man.
Not that big. Yeah, I get on Digiday.
100%.
Yeah, not that many people are reading it. But LinkedIn is the one publication that every single one of your customers reads pretty much every week. And you can just post there yourself. So, do you need to post every day? Should you post 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week? I think the reality is if you're going to do the strategy, you just can't just be posting once a week. The reason for that is not as much you need to put a ton of content out there that gets in front of people. It's that you're going to be really bad at this at first. And the rate of learning is just going to be much faster if you are doing it multiple times a week. And so, when I started doing this, I had a little reminder at 9 a.m. on my calendar every day to post, just kind of forcing function. The first few months, it's like, oh, only 300 people read that. Bummer. But it also made it less cringe because only 300 people saw my shitty content. Over time, though, audience started to grow. And, you asked the question of, what are you measuring? How are you thinking about audience versus, other metrics? I personally am looking at how many of my target customer are engaging with my post. Engagement could be a link, it could be a comment, etc. Something that everyone that I see get into this, a trap they fall into, is you start just chasing impressions or you start chasing likes because all of a sudden you see, wow, that post, 2,000 people saw it. This other post, 20,000 people saw it. And you lose sight of, okay, but of those 2,000 or 20,000 people, how many of them could have been your actual customer? And so I'm really thinking about, not how do I create a post that the most people see, but a post that likely the people seeing it, which you can see by who's engaging with it, are potential customers.
No, that all makes sense. And so walk me through then the next step. Like, so you're doing this stuff, you're getting credibility. How are you setting up these calls when you're actually getting them?
If I'm kind of hammering out a really heavy, kind of quarter by quarter, I change like how much am I focusing on sales and go to market versus, over time, I've a little bit transitioned into, being able to let our sales team do this, but I'm still doing a fair amount. But if I'm heavy the next 3 months, I am focusing on setting up
Well,
demos.
I mean, specifically then, right? Like at the outset
Yeah,
of
so
the
first
beginning.
couple years. Few-step process. 1, every week, you are sending a connection request to, let's say, 25 to 50 potential prospects. So, on the side, yes, before you can do that, you need to figure out who you want to get in touch with. We're not going to talk about prospect and list building here. Let's assume you already have that. But you are every week sending an outbound connection request to 25 to 50 potential customers. If they accept, you are not immediately DMing them. You are letting them then see your content, aka your free advertising, so that you have a much more likelihood of them accepting your request when you do DM them. So step 1, you're connecting with 25 to 50 people every week. Step 2, you're not posting every day, every other day. Step 3, once someone has been connected with you for a few weeks, you are sending a DM. What does that DM look like? Again, this can really change based on what you're selling, who you're trying to get in touch with, etc. But I think generally what I have found is first, you need to look at all your inbound DMs and try and do what they're not doing. Because again, it's essentially how do you stand out, right? And, big things to avoid, huge word walls. Someone needs to be hooked in within the first sentence or two. A cheat code that I have found recently is I will start my message by saying, apologies for coming to you with this, but I was unsure of who the right person to talk to about X might be. No one wants to be pitched. Everyone, when they're going through their LinkedIn cold DMs, is on defense, right? And so by almost saying like, I'm not trying to get on the phone with you, I'm just trying to figure out who to speak with in your org, I found that it can kind of diffuse the situation. And someone is either much more likely to be like, oh, you should talk with Mike. I'll introduce you. Or they might say, oh, that's actually me. But there's something just psychologically about instead of saying, can I get on the phone with you? Saying, wasn't quite sure who the right person to speak with would be. But I think, without getting into exactly wordsmithing DMs, you do need pretty early on to provide value to them, right? Like, why are they going to want to get on the phone with you? I think, way too many people say, let me tell you about me. Let me tell you about me. That's a separate podcast for kind of sales copy 101.
I guess I'm curious, like on the calls, because you're at this early discovery phase and you talked about like talking to them as though they're experts. Do you stick to that, or do you start like, you get in through that, but then you sell? You know what I mean?
Great question. So yeah, on these, initial DMs in the first, especially first, 6 months, maybe it's not, hey, let me tell you about my product. It's, I'm working on this. I thought it could be really interesting for you guys one day. And if you'd be open to chatting through, some ideas as I'm getting through 2025 product strategy, it'd be great to bounce those off you. Would you be open to that? Right? What am I doing once I'm getting on the phone? I am not pitching. I'm saying, just to say up front, this is not a pitch, but I have some things that people have told me could be interesting to people in your industry or companies like yours. And I'm really interested to bounce a few things off you just for your feedback, right? And they say, okay, that sounds great. Everyone likes to feel like their opinion matters. And then you're essentially giving them the pitch or the demo just without saying, you're just kind of doing it to like a third party. Hey, here's what we have. Here's kind of what we're thinking. And I think what you'll find is if your product is interesting to them, they'll say, wow, like, how much does this cost? Because this could be interesting.
They'll lean in. They'll lean in on their own.
And so, in those initial 6 months of trying to find customers, I was doing a shitload of calls by just saying, this isn't a pitch. Can I walk you through what we're doing and bounce some ideas off you? And then halfway through, they'd say, this is really interesting. And like the reality is, if they're not interested, even if you are pitching them, they're not going to be, it's not your pitch that's going to sell them. It's the product demo, right?
How quickly did you know that you were onto something? Like, how visceral were some of those early reactions to what you were, quote unquote, pitching?
Well, I think that's the beauty is as you're trying to figure out product market fit, you're having 50 calls, 20 of them are going nowhere. 20 of them are, this is interesting, but I think, if you did it this way, or if you priced it that way, and then this could be really interesting. And then 10 of them are like, holy shit, how much does this cost? And are you actually selling this, or did you actually just want my feedback, right? That is what you are focused on as a founder in your first couple years finding product market fit, is you're having 50 conversations a month, and you're triangulating between all these conversations to figure out what the product is, what the pricing is, what the packaging is, how to talk about it. And to me, product development and go-to-market kind of sales calls are all one and the same. Because if you're doing 50 of those calls, you're finding customers, you're figuring out who your customer is, and you're also getting live feedback from potential customers of, if you built this, I would buy it.
Do you start selling like when some of those customers indicate like, do you have a price ready to go, or where's the product at that stage? Like what do you say back to that?
Yeah. You have to have a product, or you have to have a price ready to go because, well, you don't have to, but I do, because I want feedback on the pricing, right? So I don't know what the pricing should be. I'm not hiring McKinsey to do a pricing.
They don't know what the
consultancy.
pricing should be either. So
And so, I'm coming up with what I think a price should be. I'm getting on the phone, I'm saying the price, and someone's either saying, "Oh, that's it," or maybe on the other end of the spectrum, they're saying, "Yeah, that's thanks, but that we would never be able to pay that," right? And neither of those are the, "Oh, okay, then I know the answer," right? Because someone could say, "Huh, that's not that much," and maybe on the next call, you should try adding $1,000 to the monthly price and see, when do people start to balk? At the same time, just because someone says, "I could never pay that," maybe that means it's too expensive, or maybe that just means that's not the right customer for you, right? And so, yes, I think like on these calls, you're figuring out feedback on the product, but just as important is figuring out feedback on pricing. And if you have 50 of these calls over a few months and you bounce pricing off of 50 people, you're going to pretty soon start to understand what pricing people will go for, what they won't go for, at what point you're going to lose customers, as well as, that's a market we definitely shouldn't go after. So just as an example of that, in the early days, there's thousands of companies that have content that want to distribute that content. But the reason they might want to do that is there's 100 reasons, right? And just two very different reasons. Maybe Instacart is just literally trying to get in front of people so that they remember who Instacart is, right? I'm reading my local paper. I see the top 50 groceries on Instacart. I'm 2% more likely to order my groceries on Instacart later that day, right? We early on spoke with Lifetime Fitness, the gym company, and they were trying to get people to subscribe to Lifetime Fitness because someone read their article, right? So they said, sure, we would pay $3,000 a month for this. We knew though, because you need to ask these prospects, why are you buying? They were saying, well, we hope someone reads the article and then, immediately signs up for a gym membership. And so for them, we realized that is not a good customer. If you're looking for someone to use this because the next day they're going to buy your product, then our product is probably too expensive for you. Whereas if this is coming from your PR and marketing comms budget, then this is going to work out for you.
So you're actually doing some selection on the customers, which leads to my next question, which is around those first few customers. How do you do you at some point, as people are saying, oh, how much is this? And you give them a price and like, okay, that's fine, I would pay that. Do you just start adding them up, or do you kind of set a kind of parameters and say, I'll take on 3 customers, 5 customers, design partners, these sort of things, as you kind of build things out? How did you kind of play that part of it?
Yeah. So in the early days for us, I set a goal of bringing on 10 customers. And even though I knew eventually that I wanted this to be an annual subscription product, for the first 10 customers, we said we're only going to bring them on for 3-month pilots. And the reason for that is we wanted to know which of those 10 customers after 3 months wanted to keep working with us and which did not, right? Because that was going to inform who our next 100 customers were. And so I think there's a lot of, as much as eventually you want ARR, people locked into annual agreements, etc., I think there's a lot of value in your first 10 or 50 customers being on shorter term contracts, because if you sign people to annual agreements, it's going to take you a year to figure out, Do they actually like the product?
Man, it's funny you say that because like it is the opposite of what especially a bootstrap founder would want, because like a lot of times the ideal, the gold standard, let's say, is sign a year, pay me today, and then I'm positive cash flow. But to your point, you don't really know how well it's doing. I had one other founder in here, the founder of, I believe it was Numeric, who said something very similar. He's like, I only do monthly contract in the beginning, right? He's like, I only did monthly contracts because it forced us to care. He's like, the reality is we have so many things to care about. If I sign a year contract, yeah, I'm going to tell my team we care about retention, we want to retain, but like it's going to be hard to prioritize that because nobody's churning and nobody's going to churn for a long time. And so by doing monthly contracts in his case, he was like, it's a forcing function. Like we can't, we don't want to lose these customers. So we really have to kind of invest the time to making sure they love the product, they use it, etc. So it's kind of similar. Like yours, I mean, it's kind of a two-way street. Part of it is making sure they're happy. And the other part is finding the right customer sets versus locking in customers that are going to be like just not helpful long-term.
Yeah. I mean, today, 3 years after the fact, we only sign annual agreements. But if we had done that on day one, for one, it's a lot harder to sign an annual agreement. And so it was a way that you just need to get customers in the door on day one. But it was also a way of getting a much faster feedback loop on what customers wanted, why they were happy, why they weren't. I think another big problem you run into is a lot of times you'll have a customer that says they're happy, but when they come up for renewal, they don't renew because you realize maybe your contact was happy, but they don't have the data to show their boss that this is valuable. And so again, you could go a full year with your contact saying, this is great, this is great, this is great. And then at the end of the year, realize, shit, we never put the pieces in place to actually get a renewal. And so you just need to start learning those things much faster, which you can't do if you have an annual contract at the start.
Did you give discounts or any sort of like guarantees to get those first few across the line? Like how did you add a bit of a forcing function to just get them to move and sign those pilots?
We did not give guarantees. Maybe one or two. Did we give an initial guarantee? Possibly. I mean, I think at the end of the day, every product is so different that like you got to do what you got to do to get the deal done. Did we give discounts? Definitely. On those 3-month pilots, we gave discounts. We're bootstrapped. We have a high margin product. I was not going to charge so little that we were losing money, but I was fine, having less margin. At the end of the day, though, again, if everyone is saying, oh, I'll do this at the discount, then the question becomes, okay, but will we ever be able to charge twice as much of this? So I think it is really important to come out to market with the pricing that you hope to have, because again, part of the value of all of these conversations is figuring out what your pricing is going to be.
And so once you're done, let's say these 3-month pilots with kind of design partner-ish, some I assume churn, some really love it, whatever. How do you, like at what point do you set that goal of 10 customers? At what point do you have enough visibility that you set a goal of $1 million in revenue? And then how do you work backwards from that to getting that done? Because it's a high bar. Like 0 to $1 million in a year is like top decile. I mean, everybody wants to do it, but 90% don't.
We're fortunate in that our contracts are 60 to 90K ACV, which means they're 5 to 8, 5 to 9 grand a month. And getting to $1 million run rate is only $83K a month, right? Am I doing this? Yeah. I usually don't do public
You're right.
math.
You're good. Yeah, you're good.
So, you're not bringing on that many customers, right? Now, again, like you need to start to think about churn, and you're probably going to be churning a lot of your first 30 customers, because I think especially in the early days, you don't know who the right customer is. So the goal is bring 50 customer auths on, figure out which 15 stay, research the hell out of those 15 to figure out what makes them who they are and why they renewed. And then hopefully the next 20 customers you bring on, more than 15 out of 50 will stay, right? But you're not going to reach 100% NDR, 100% logo retention right off the bat. And if you are, you're probably not casting a wide enough net, right? Right now, Elon is famous for saying, you need to keep ripping shit out. And if you haven't had to put stuff back in, then you haven't ripped enough out. And I think like a weird inverse of that is like, if you don't have customers that aren't coming back to you, then you haven't cast a wide enough net of who could be using your product. We are thinking a lot about how do we cast a really wide net. It's okay that not all of our first 100 customers want to keep working with us. We're not going to take that personally. We're just going to learn that that's not the right type of customer for us. But to your question of, okay, we need to start getting on 5 or 10 new accounts every month. How do we scale that? I mean, candidly, I think that's where you start to blend from founder-led sales into bringing on a sales leader. So we have an incredible VP of sales here. I think as a founder, that's where you start to go from being founder-led sales into founder-led marketing.
And is that, to be clear, that's even from 0 to 1, or are you talking now where you're going from 3 to 10?
You would just, I guess, no, that's once you're definitely past $1 million ARR.
Okay.
I think as
getting
a founder,
to that million, you're just running the same.
you need to be on the phones, learning, pitching well past the first million.
And so for that first million, are you just running that same playbook on LinkedIn? You just dialed it up, just did more requests, more demos, and kind of rinse repeat?
Yes, and we did start to hire sellers, and I think what I realized is I am always going to be the best probably at setting sales calls up, but we depending on who you are as a founder, sellers may be better at getting things across the finish line. So setting up anyone with a founder title with kind of the gift of gab in email or LinkedIn messaging can get someone on the phone,
because that's so different. Like, you normally, right, you have a BDR, which is the lowest of the totem pole, sends it to an AE, which closes it, and if it's an enterprise deal, the founder or head of sales comes in. In your case, you're saying because of the way LinkedIn works, you could actually invert that, where doing a demo well to get somebody across the line is actually a bit more of a commodity, whereas being able to get somebody to open up your message on LinkedIn and take the call in the first place, that's the part where founders can, are a bit more of a lever point. Like, there's just more differentiation.
So I will say that the strategy we're talking about here of using LinkedIn to get in front of people, get more responses, I think a BDR could do this. And I think BDRs are doing it, right? There's great BDRs who are posting really interesting shit on Facebook, and they're crushing the other BDRs on their team who are just sending a bunch of cold emails, right? But I think as a founder, you do have a unique opportunity to have a much higher hit rate. I think as a founder, it's your responsibility to be taking the first 100 sales calls, because again, you're figuring out pricing, you're figuring out who the right customer is, et cetera. And I think, if product market fit is the most important thing for your startup eventually, then you can't afford to put someone else on this. What I will say is, even if you're not a born salesman and you're maybe a great engineer and this, isn't quite your thing, hiring a seller to deal with negotiations, to kind of deal with the 19 follow-ups and going through procurement process, like that is something that I think, our best sellers, how they show me, here's how we're going to kind of schedule out the next steps with the prospect and keep things moving along and get things across the finish line. They're way better than that at me. But I think as a founder or whoever's doing this, there's a real opportunity to be the person helping set up calls.
Do you remember in those early days what, like, some of the leading indicators? Like, I'm just trying to think about how you knew you had something like magical here. Like, do you remember, for example, the demo to close rate or some other kind of early indicators that you might have been looking at to say, wow, this is kind of like really getting some pull, different than maybe other things you tried before?
What really clicked for me with this LinkedIn go-to-market strategy in terms of setting demos up was about 3 or 4 months in, I had a post, which I now call my watering hole posts, which essentially was a post where all of a sudden prospects that I didn't even know they existed, but they were great qualified leads, started commenting on my post and more or less sticking their hand up and saying, I exist and I know who you are, Noah, and making it very easy for me to reach out to them. And I think, no matter who you are and what industry you're in, you can create these types of watering hole posts. These are the ones where you go and you see, God, everyone in this industry is kind of chiming in and, showing off what they do, whatever it is. That's when I realized, holy shit, these are the people that I wanted to be reading that trade publication article, and they're commenting on my post. And if I reach out to them next week, like, they definitely know who I am. Lo and behold, I had a much higher hit rate from that. And that's when I realized, like, okay, there's some real magic here to be had.
What is an example of a watering hole post, or what's one that you remember, specifically well?
Yeah. So, I mean, we could talk about mine, we could talk about another industry, but so for Stacker, one example of that has been saying, here's, to super simplify it, here's 5 great examples of brands producing awesome content. Who am I missing? And all of a sudden, they start commenting and being like, oh, you should see what we're doing. Oh, have you, and they're tagging their friends. I've got this friend that does this at this company. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, cool. You guys are just literally sticking your hand up that you'd be potential customers and you appreciate that I'm kind of evangelizing this trend and this phenomenon, right? I think, if you are an AI.
You know what? Give me others. Give me others for Stacker because you know them the best, and even that I know is super helpful. Like founders will figure out how to apply that for them, I'm sure. But yeah, give me another one. Give me another one for Stacker.
I'll give you a few. So one of which again has been the job openings and job postings. So basically, the posts that go the most quote unquote viral predictably is saying, here are 5 to 10 jobs in this industry. These companies are hiring. And it just creates it creates a lot of goodwill. People start commenting what other jobs are out there, et cetera, et cetera.
And are you leveraging, like, are you tagging companies that you want to work with? Are you thinking about it that way or just not necessarily?
That's a different post type, which is I'll say, here's 3 companies producing amazing content in the health and wellness area that are basically replacing niche publications like Health Magazine and Men's Fitness. And I will tag both the company as well as I will tag the managing editor or editor-in-chief, which is the person I want to get on the phone with. And pretty predictively, if I say, here's 3 companies that are doing awesome work in this space, 2 of them will comment and be like, thanks for calling us out. And, within a month, we're getting on the phone. So you can definitely get, pretty scientific with this. I think that there is a fine line and a lot of nuance between it being very cheesy and people can read through your BS. But there's definitely ways to create content that become watering holes for people in your industry.
It's pretty crazy, but it's just like, in a sense, it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Like, how do you add value before you extract? Like if you hit somebody up and you're like, hey, like, here's my thing, like, listen to me, whatever. You're trying to like suck time away, attention away, and you haven't earned it. Like you really haven't earned it. But in a way, when you're just like putting stuff out there, you're creating value, you're creating content, and you just like plant that that seed, and you turn somebody that's completely cold and uninterested into at least something slightly warm. It's a huge difference maker.
Yeah, I think today you really, doing outreach for sales, you have more competition and noise than any time ever in history. And the reality is, it does not matter how good of a writer, how good of a email or in-mail hook you have, because there's just so much noise. And this is a way to break above the noise and become someone that someone is excited to get on the phone with, as well as, as we talk about things like watering hole posts, the way to kind of get a lot more leverage out of your time than just cold outreach.
And just like for like kind of setting expectations sake, like what's like some of your best posts in terms of reach? What's some of your average? Like, what are we talking about? Because somebody's thinking about doing this and maybe they start doing it and they're like, am I doing well? Am I not doing well? Like, what's the bar?
So I'm happy to share some with you if you want to put them in the show notes. But I mean, the bar really depends because, again, it depends how big of an industry you're in, right? So like I'm in a pretty small niche. And I guess I'll say, posts that I'm excited about from I have a lot of my potential customers, hanging out here, talking, commenting. Those will do between, let's say, 5 and 15,000 impressions. It took me 5 months of posting before I had something do over 10,000 impressions, but I drove a ton of sales calls before anything did 10,000 impressions. What's really tough is I did that post that you found me on of effective go-to-market strategies on LinkedIn. 700,000 people read that post. I didn't drive any business from it. So that post was really good for my ego. It was really good for getting me on this podcast, but I didn't drive a single sales call out of it with 700,000 people reading it. Whereas a week before, I did a post that only 4,000 people saw, and I set up 3 sales calls. So I think it's really easy to get distracted by numbers when the reality is, don't look at impressions, look at, am I getting engagement from the people that matter.
It's huge. And I'll say this, like when you talk to the LinkedIn editors, and it's important because obviously the algorithm is tailored to this sort of thing. Like this is exactly what they want people to use LinkedIn for. Like they don't want LinkedIn to become Twitter or Instagram or anything where like the goal is to go crazy viral. That's why even on, like if you see something viral on X, like we're talking 20 million, 50 million views sometimes. Like I've never seen a post on LinkedIn that gets those level of views. Like the most I've seen is like 5 million, and it's super, super rare because like LinkedIn is just not set up for that. And in any case, like what's the value of it? But it's actually crazy if you think about it. Like 5,000, 10,000 views in the world of online posting, like is really not a lot. Like it's truly not a lot. And yet it drives meaningful leads. So like that's.
But on the other side of that, 5,000 people, 10% of them are qualified prospects, and you're in B2B.
It's huge. It's freaking
500 of your core customer reading your post is pretty much all you could hope for.
100%, but that's where you see the opportunity, because it's like to be relevant on other platforms like YouTube or whatever, like you were talking about trying to get millions and millions of views. To be relevant on LinkedIn and get value, you need to get 5 or 10,000. They just need to be the right ones.
Yeah. And we're obviously, my strategy, we sell into businesses. This is a B2B sales strategy. I think, the same thing could be used for if I'm a founder and I'm trying to raise money next year is, you could cold DM 50 VCs, or you could do the exact same strategy with potential investors this year. Fast forward 6 months and all of those investors have been reading your, building in public LinkedIn posts, and they're way more likely to want to take the meeting. So I think this can be used. Sales is obviously a very broad term.
Well, no, I think this has been great. We've gone super deep. I love these types of episodes. They're super tactical. I think like if people know a little bit about LinkedIn or they knew nothing about LinkedIn, they should know how to leverage LinkedIn. Now it's just up to them if they actually want to do it, because it takes real work to actually post every day or like 3 times a week. It's no joke, but you're totally right. And it's the classic Mr. Beast thing. Like his number one advice to anybody that wants to produce content is do 100 videos, get a little better on each one. And that's the same thing here. Like post 100 times, get a little bit better, a little bit more targeted, a little bit more, punchy or whatever it is on each post. And, you'll see the results. But anyways, thanks for jumping on the show, man. It's been great.
Appreciate it. It's been fun.
So guess what? I met this founder who listened to every single episode of the Product Market Fit Show. He just called me and he sold his company for over $1 billion. That's right. If you listen to every episode of the Product Market Fit Show, that's what's going to happen. It's I can't say it's guaranteed, but it's what I've seen. It's what I've seen in the past, but you won't know for sure unless you try it out for yourself. So go back, because there's over 100 episodes of the Product Market Fit Show and you haven't listened to most of them. Check them out.